So our first question for all of the panelists is to please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your career path, including how you got into federal government and the position that you're in right now. So we will start with Jason.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having us today. Thank you for the partnership and Phi Beta Kappa Society for having us all here today. And now I can see everybody. Good morning. My name is Jason Tolub. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Talent Acquisition at the Department of State. And I have been in this office for almost 3 years now in this position. I've been with the Department of State for a little less than 15 years at this point. My undergraduate, and I'm going to try to keep it short. I was just telling everybody on the panel just before we got on here, my career is all convoluted. So it kind of takes a long path. So I will try to keep it quick and short. Quite honestly, it's a long story. My undergraduate degree is in theater. I was a theater lighting major, and I used to be a roadie. That was my original career, doing lighting for major concerts. In that career, I did a lot of things. I learned management, program analyst. I did project management. And I gained all of those experiences to be able to actually, understand really what it took to be able to do things. But I got out of that. I got into business for a long time, and I did this in the private sector. I worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I worked in the management program. I became a branch manager, learned how to be able to manage people, manage staff. And then I backpacked across Europe. I decided in my mid-20s to backpack across Europe. I gained a perspective of new things, new life, go out there and see the world. And that's where I started getting understanding of more international life. I'm first generation American too. So I was brought up in a family that had a different view, I think, of the world. And I wanted to see that myself. I then went and got my master's degree. I got it in education, secondary education. I taught history. I taught history at high school. But I always wanted to do more. I was always looking at something else, not more, because teaching high school, that is doing more. I'm helping people. And I wanted to see what else I could do with that. And I joined Peace Corps. And it was during that time when I was in Peace Corps and I was serving in Ukraine that I was working very closely with the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. And at that time, the ambassador was Ambassador William Taylor. And I started speaking to him, and I knew nothing about the Department of State, quite honestly, at that point. And he was the one that started talking to me a little bit about, hey, have you ever thought about joining the Department of State? No, I didn't. But I didn't know what it took. And he started talking to me about the Foreign Service, which I can get into as we talk about it too, with the process with that. But then about the civil service. And I'm a civil service employee. I'm not Foreign Service. I went through the Foreign Service process and whatnot, and I got into a program in the civil service, and I wanted to give back into government and to be able to give back into public service. And I have done that now for the past 15 years. And it's because of the tools that I had in my own personal life that I'm able to do that now. So my life has been, like I said, a big mix of, I wasn't in international affairs. I didn't do, I didn't do statistical analysis, but that's what I do now. And it's because of stuff that I all had behind me that got me to where I am today. So that was trying to be brief.
Thank you, Jason, for that introduction. We will go to Matthew next.
Hey, everyone. Good seeing everyone. My story is actually not too dissimilar from Jason's. I actually did theater and dance and choir all through my high school and earlier careers, but didn't know what I wanted to do for undergraduate. I knew I liked to read, and I'm a second generation American, but my family is Hispanic, but I wasn't raised speaking Spanish. So I did a minor in Spanish, and had done so all through high school as well. So that's what I did. I did English and Spanish in my undergrad at the University of Texas, and didn't know what I wanted to do, but kind of like Jason again. I knew I wanted to get out of the United States for a little while. I wanted to learn another language in addition to Spanish, and I wanted to see the rest of the world, and I had this real desire to serve. I had done a lot of volunteer work in college, and so the Peace Corps was really attractive to me. So I actually 2 weeks after I graduated undergraduate, I was on a plane not too far from Ukraine, just a little bit south in Bulgaria in the Southern Balkans. So I spent 2 years in Bulgaria right after my undergraduate education, teaching high school English to a bunch of high schoolers, many of whom were only like 18 months younger than I was. So it was an interesting experience. Still have a lot of relationships with a lot of the students that I taught now over 20 years ago, and learned Bulgarian. And, that was a major, it still is a major part of my life. My daughter is half Bulgarian. But coming out of there, knew I wasn't done with school, just didn't really have a purpose for continuing my education because I knew I didn't want to keep doing English after my undergrad. So while I was in the Peace Corps, I applied to a bunch of schools in England as well as in the United States, and knew I wanted to do something kind of in public policy, international relations. Still wasn't totally sure, so just applied to a slew of different places. And wound up at Oxford in a course that kind of let me do a lot of different things, which I didn't understand at the time. Oxford had actually recommended. I had applied for an international relations master's, and they said, "Yeah, that sounds good, but given your experience in the Balkans, we really think you should do an East European focus study that will allow you to do international relations, but also politics, economics, a whole host of kind of the social sciences, humanities." Related to Eastern Europe. So I did that and did the master's in Russian East European area studies and focused on my dissertation on the European Union and the International Atomic Energy Agency right after the fall of communism. There were 6 Soviet-built nuclear reactors in Bulgaria that the international community wanted Bulgaria to shut down immediately after communism fell. But those nuclear reactors supplied close to 80% of the electricity for Bulgaria and for a number of the neighboring countries. And they're like, well, we can't shut these down unless you want us to live in the Stone Age. So there was just a huge controversy about them. So I wrote a dissertation about those nuclear reactors and everything that was happening with them. And a lot of the research for that wound up in the first days after the fall of communism. There wasn't a lot of security. A lot of folks didn't know what was going on. So a lot of the very early environmental activists in Bulgaria, they ransacked the nuclear facility and stole all their archives. So I did all of my research with all these environmentalists in Bulgaria, in their apartments, in their houses, in their little villas out in the countryside, looking at all of these archives that they had ransacked in the first days after communism fell, and really learned their story about how those environmentalists and public health activists, they were really the ones that helped bring down communism in Bulgaria and helped establish democracy there. So I was invited to stay on at Oxford and do a history degree, even though I hadn't done any history before then, really, except for a little bit in my master's. And I wrote a political history of Bulgaria's environmental movement. And all the time I did that knowing that I didn't want to be an academic. I knew academia wasn't the career I wanted, but was increasingly feeling like, oh my gosh, these environmentalists who are fighting for public health, who are fighting, for human rights and for just treatment, that's something I want to do. But I wanted to go home. I wanted to go back to Texas by that point. I've been living in Europe for 6 years. So I wanted to go back to Texas and do what they were doing. So went back to Texas, thought, I was a hot shot and that I'd immediately find a job and everything would just be hunky-dory. And I was unemployed for a year and wound up substitute teaching at my old high school with a PhD from Oxford, and had to swallow a lot of pride and really was a tough year, but stuck to my guns and eventually found a nonprofit in Austin, Texas, that got me in the door. And a few months later, this small struggling nonprofit in Houston that worked on environmental public health issues and was about to shut down. It was in real trouble. They kind of took a chance on me as their last ditch effort and hired me at 27 to come run this nonprofit in Houston. And that was, with all the other education I formerly had that I have pieces of paper for, that was a formative education where I had to learn how to run an organization, I had to learn how to be a boss. I had to learn how to do payroll and real estate and IT and policy and advocacy and media work and lobbying and legislation. And I had to learn the whole gamut of everything that goes into activism and advocacy in 6 years. And reformed the organization, took it back to its grassroots where it was originally founded as an environmental justice organization back in the 80s before EJ was really called environmental justice. And through that experience, was identified by some of the folks at EPA during President Obama's first term. They were looking for a new director of their environmental justice program, and they wanted somebody who had on the ground experience, but also knew how to take a struggling organization and turn it around. And that's what I had done in Houston. So they kind of came and got me. And I've now been at EPA. This is my 10th year. I'm a civil servant as well. I'm a career senior executive. So as long as I don't do anything too bad, I managed to make it through different administrations. So I've been in now through the second Obama term, through the Trump term, and now working harder than ever halfway through the Biden term. But that is, I guess that's the short course of how I got to where I am.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Matthew. We will now go over to Malik.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Malik Walker, and I just have to quickly say one of the interesting things I'm hearing is this kind of thread of kind of not necessarily sticking to the initial path that you have set out, and that's kind of how mine was. So my first foray into the federal government was actually when I was a rising senior in high school at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So I worked in one of the regional offices in the Research Triangle Park area of North Carolina. So I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, so that was pretty close. So started to do some research there in one of the labs, which actually led to my major in psychology at Hampton University. So went to Hampton, graduated, and all of my life I actually knew without a doubt that I wanted to be a lawyer. All of my life I wanted to be a lawyer. So after graduating from Hampton, I started law school in Chicago, and within that first year, I knew law school was not for me, and I did not want to become a lawyer. I absolutely hated it, so I quickly decided it was time to pivot. So if between that first year of law school and that summer, one of my friends from Raleigh, I was living in Chicago. One of my friends from Raleigh reached out. He was also living in Chicago and said, "Hey, why don't you take this internship in the Senate office?" And the senator happened to be Barack Obama, so in his U.S. Senate office in Chicago. But it was an unpaid internship, and so I said, "No, Chicago's really expensive. I can't do that." So I turned it down. But then I ended up going to graduate school that next semester at DePaul University, which is also in Chicago. And my friend reached out and said, "Hey, you really should consider this." Turns out I also needed a graduate school course. One of my requirements for one of my first graduate school course was an internship. So I took the unpaid internship in this Senate office, and it ended up being an amazing experience for me. I interned in the office of then U.S. Senator Barack Obama as an unpaid intern for a semester and a half. And I say a semester and a half while I was in grad school, a semester and a half, because by the before the end of that second semester where I was an intern, I ended up getting hired to work there full time. So I worked there doing constituent service work. Then I moved on to work directly with the state director, where we were working with elected officials across Illinois. And then at that time, Barack Obama announced that he was going to run for president. So I ended up working on his campaign staff as well. And then also returning to the Senate office for a month or so before going to the White House. I worked at the White House and started working on the presidential personnel staff in the White House for the first 6 months, where we were doing a lot of hiring, vetting for everywhere from the undersecretary in an agency on down. And so that's when I really started to realize that I was interested in personnel work and really developing talent pipelines, which is the work that I'm doing more of now. So I worked in the White House, then moved to the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, where I worked everywhere from congressional legislative affairs to student programs. Again, all with the lens of how do we bring in the best people to serve in the federal government. One thing I failed to mention, when I was in grad school, I was studying public service management because I knew that was a passion of mine. So at OPM, I worked in all those different areas, worked in the Office of Public Engagement, then back to Congressional Legislative Affairs. Then I worked in the Partnership for Public Service, where I met Leah and Logan and some of the other partnership folks. Um, and I worked there again, helping to develop talent pipelines. And when I say talent pipelines, again, figuring out how to bring people into the federal government, young people specifically. And I focused a lot on STEM talent. So we helped to launch the Cybersecurity Talent Initiative to bring in mission critical talent into the federal government. So I did that for about almost 3 years, and then joined the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I had an interest in communications, so I did some marketing and communications work here, and then got promoted to a position where I'm running our internship and youth employment programs here at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Again, part of what I do is try to make sure that we are bringing in the best and brightest to serve in the federal government. I tell anyone that the federal government allows you to touch so many different areas, so many different subject matters, everything from foreign service to STEM. We hire a lot of engineers. So everywhere you think the federal government touches every aspect of your life in some way, from the air that you breathe, you hear that a lot, to the highways that you drive on, the federal government's there. So that's a passion of mine, and that led to the work that I'm doing now. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you all and hearing your questions this morning.
Great, thank you, Malik. And last but not least, we have Nina.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for having us again. I am going to sort of echo the sentiment of all our panelists with the variety of experience. I did not start out in the federal government. I actually started out in the private sector, actually nonprofit sector, working with persons with disabilities straight out of college. I interned at an agency helping persons with developmental disabilities, and for a period of about 17 years, that is what I solely did at a nonprofit agency. I started initially as direct support staff, and then of course moved my way from direct support staff to management, and then eventually leading to become a director at an organization that services adults with disabilities. So the majority of my experience, or my adult experience outside of college, had to do directly with my major, which in undergraduate was psychology. For that 17 years after that, the years that following that is, I decided to start my own business, which was actually working with persons with disabilities. I did a training program that helped persons with disabilities to find employment. And from that spanned my interest in getting the master's degree and learning a little bit more about the business side. So what I decided to do from there on was to obtain a master's degree to kind of understand the ins and outs of business, from anywhere from human resources to HR law, into the actual project planning. And so from there, what I decided to do was to look more into human resources, because I actually liked the field. I like HR law in particular. And so I decided that I was going to make an about course, and that about course led me to federal service, for which the last 14 years I have been at CDC in the HR capacity. My current role as a supervisory workforce development advisor offers me the opportunity to meet with bright young talent such as yourself. I am tasked with the talent sourcing from the perspective of diversity and inclusion. So I am actually I have a team that recruits for positions for students, recent graduates. We also look at persons with disabilities, veterans, any special hiring authority that you potentially could think of, or a special way to come into the federal service, such as a student or a recent graduate, such as an individual with a disability, veteran, Peace Corps volunteer. I am actually charged with, or the team is actually charged with doing that. One of the things that I would say over the course of this 14 years serving in the HR capacity, what has astonished me, or what has been has influenced me, is that the ability to go out and meet with such bright talent, and having that opportunity to speak with them about not only the mission of CDC, but to engage with them, to also let them understand that we're not just a scientific organization. While we are primarily public health and scientific in nature, we do have a lot of occupations that are support in nature. Anywhere, just as Malik mentioned, the vast array of positions that are covered across the federal government, the CDC is no different. We have a lot of administrative capacity, a lot of communications, cybersecurity, not to mention grants management, as well as project management, span across CDC. So while we do offer lots of positions in the sciences, we also offer lots of positions in administrative in nature. So thank you. Thank you for having us.
Great. Thank you all for those introductions. So we have a question for each panelist teed up, but I want to pause here just to make sure we have ample time for student questions. So if anyone has a burning question that they want to get us started with, we'll be happy to take those.
Hi, echo. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Hi, good morning. My name is Olivia. And I have a question regarding your federal service and how it changes depending on the switching of administrations, like the presidential administrations. Have you experienced challenges with that? And then if you have, how do you manage those challenges and continue your work through management switches that are pretty constant?
I'd be happy to take that, or Matt. I mean, I think you and I may.
Yeah,
Matt,
we're the agencies that probably get whiplashed the most, Jason.
Probably. I think my neck sometimes hurts from that too. You know, we serve at the pleasure of, you know, our agency, you know, our mission, and at the president, you know. So what we do, we are with the what I always look at is what we have to do, and look at what the future is for the next 20 years, 25 years, 50 years, you know, and whatever it may be and is enacted, we have to be able to look at and implement. But we also have to be able to understand that we are career, and we are here to be able to understand, you know, what our priorities are. You know, we may not always agree with every policy from everything that is put down, but so we have to analyze and make decisions and recommendations for what is right. But it's not about what we feel personally, because we can't do that. You have to separate whatever your own personal feelings are from them. It's about what the agency's missions, goals, and priorities are. And that's what the main goal is. And you have to be able to do that and separate yourself from that. That's what you are as a public servant, because you are serving for the people. The people have elected their administration, and you speak for the people. That is how you serve. You serve for the pleasure of the people. And you have to always understand that as a public servant. Matt, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, or if anybody else wanted to add anything with that too.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I mean, I think, you know, for me, it's been a real, like its own civics lesson. And it's something that I still struggle with some, because I think my view of it is different from some of my colleagues that are senior executives at EPA. But one of the reasons we have senior career folks who are not supposed to change between political cycles is to protect the institutions of government. Like that's part of our job. As Jason was saying, right, the folks that come in because of an election that are appointed, they get to set the policy, they get to point to the big decisions, but it's our job to say, well, that's illegal, or that's unethical, or that's just a really bad decision. And that will change from government to government. You know, the things that I had to do and the things that my office was kind of torn between in the last administration were very different from what we're dealing with now. It doesn't mean that it's any less of a challenge. And in some ways, we have an even greater challenge in this administration because the mandate did swing from, you know, President Trump wanted to zero my program out and fire all of us, to suddenly, you know, President Biden wants to give us billions of dollars and make us this other huge thing overnight that is just impossible. So it's challenging in both areas. It's just a different sort of a challenge, and that's part of our job as civil servants, is to lead through that, to protect the institution, to support our people, and as Jason was saying, to serve the American people. That's we take an oath to uphold the Constitution. We're here to serve the United States and all of the people in the United States, and we're on, in some ways, the front line of, you know, working with, but sometimes defending against the political folks that come in above us.
Thank you so
I'll
much.
just add on. I think, you know, one thing to keep in mind is that as a whole, the federal workforce is about 2.1 million, or maybe even more. And there's a very small percentage of those that come in that change within administrations. So most of us, I think, are civil servants. As administrations change, but our overall mission of each agency really doesn't change. Some of the priorities may shift here and there, but the overall mission of the agency really doesn't change.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually also concur with Malik and Matthew and Jason. The mission of the organization does not change, and therefore our as civil service, our mission employees don't change as well with any administration change. What I would like to say, of course, just from the CDC perspective, of course, the priorities shift quite a bit because, of course, the nature of our business is protecting the health and safety of the U.S. when it comes to public health emerging issues. And so, of course, the direction may change a bit depending on what the public health emergency is at that time. So although we have the change in administration, the first and forefront of CDC would be protecting the safety and health of the United States when it comes to public health issues. And so therefore the priorities may not necessarily change with the administration, but does change quite a bit when we have a public health emergency that arises. And of course, most of you probably are already aware that, you know, the current COVID response has been huge for us. So yeah, was in the previous administration and is for this administration as well.
Great. Thank you all so much for those perspectives. Any other students want to come and ask questions? Okay, lots of you. So we'll start, sorry, apologies, don't have names. If you want to come up and ask your question.
Hello, I'm Muskan. I'm from Utah. I kind of have a pointed question to Matthew, if that's okay. So Matthew, I've kind of been thinking about like kind of inside and outside of like the bureaucratic system and getting things done. And I guess you've kind of done both, like in Bulgaria, working on your dissertation and then, you know, coming into like the government. Could you kind of like go into detail about like what that transition was like how it hindered kind of the like accomplishing the missions of like the EPA and your office specifically, but then also like how did it benefit that and moving those goals forward?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So it took me a few months to understand why I had been hired for this job, because me, the age I was at and my background coming in at the position I did is very not common in the federal government. Most people spend a lot of time to working through the bureaucracy to get a chance to be a senior executive. I think one of the things, though, and I was hired, I mean, it was the political appointees in the Obama administration, some of whom had also had similar experiences working on the ground, being community organizers like the president, that they really wanted to bring more of that into the federal government, into the career civil service. And I didn't really understand until several months in that one of the reasons they came and got me for this job in particular is because environmental justice within the federal government is still an advocacy proposition. My program at EPA is an advocacy program, and we actually we train folks as advocates in the EJ program because we're doing the same thing more or less that I did when I was on the ground in Houston, running an advocacy nonprofit. I have a few different tools. I can't go work the media like I could in Houston. One of my biggest tools to try to pressure government when I was outside of government was to work with journalists, and to work with the news cycle and to get things in the paper and get things on the nightly news. I did a lot of that in Houston. It was very effective at pressuring the government. I obviously can't do that as a civil servant. I've been fortunate, at least in this administration, that they've let me talk to journalists much more regularly to actually describe what we are doing on environmental justice at EPA in this administration. But that has not been my experience in the previous two administrations, where I was not allowed to talk to journalists ever. Never on the record, never off the record, never on background. They walled me off from talking to the media for a long time. But what I can do as an advocate within the government is to, I can get into the rooms that citizens can't, right? I can get into the rooms where decisions are actually being made. That doesn't mean, though, I get to make the decisions, because I don't have the authority to make any of the big decisions. I don't write a rule. I don't sign any of our big rules. I don't issue permits. I don't order, inspections to go out on the ground in communities. But I can get in the room, but when I'm in the room, or when my staff are in the room, we have to use advocacy to convince our colleagues or our political leadership to try to do that right thing, to try to go inspect in the areas that need it the most, to try to write the rule in a way that is most protective of those communities that have been dumped on for generations because they're communities of color or they're low-income communities. And we use a lot of the same tools that I did on the outside. We use science, we use the law, we use the voices of the people who are most impacted, which is really the most effective tool, right? Anytime that we can actually bring the voices of actual, human beings in the United States who are being affected, who are being dumped on, whose children are suffering because of pollution or because of a lack of access to a clean environment. Anytime we can bring their voices into the room with us, whether physically or just relating their stories and their realities, that brings pressure to bear on those folks who are actually going to make those decisions. And so, I think that has greatly benefited me, having the experience of being that advocate on the ground. And one of the things that I'm excited about right now, because right now is the first time since I've been here over 10 years that I'm actually going to be able to hire a bunch of people from the outside into the EJ program and into EPA. We're going to hire, over 100 people probably in the next year or so. Is we're very specifically going to go out and recruit for individuals who have that experience of being advocates on the ground for their communities, because I think that is something that is pretty rare in the government and the bureaucracy. But I think it is really valuable for folks who have that reality, who have that foundation of struggle and of fighting against the government and of pressuring the government, to then have the opportunity to come inside the four walls of government and continue that fight from inside.
Great. Thank you very much, Matthew. Okay, we'll go back here, and then we had some questions.
Hi, I'm Malik. Thank you so much for taking your time to speak to us. I was curious if there's any current trends in federal service aspiring public servants should be aware of, and how federal service has changed since any of the panelists have entered their careers. Thank you.
I'll speak on that. Well, as far as the current trends, I will say that although diversity has been at the forefront for many years, our executive orders that have recently been released on diversity and diversifying the federal workforce itself, I think that I can only speak for CDC, but that our primary focus has been wanted to be more like the customers that we actually serve, or the U.S. population. And so for us, diversity is a huge change or a huge trend that we see moving forward. And how we have worked on that is to kind of develop more workforce plans that include more diverse employees. And so that includes serving on lots of work groups that will allow us to engage more with with outside candidates that come from more diverse backgrounds. Also facilitating initiatives that will further promote our need for diversity, and as well as offer opportunities where we are conducting and recruiting more for people of diverse backgrounds. So for us, I would have to say that over the course of the time that I've been in the federal government, I've seen us make a larger push towards diversity than we previously have. I know we've had lots of executive orders that have been promoting diversity, but I do feel like at this current stage that we are having a larger lens on that. And so because we have a larger lens on that, it does seem as though we are moving the needle towards that improvement in that area.
I'll just add very quickly. I think we're all starting to look more about look at workplace flexibilities. How can we become a more agile workforce? I think part of that came as partly because of the pandemic, where we had to shift to a virtual environment, but even now looking at what we can do now to bring on people that desire to work in other places and possibly work for the USPTO while living in a remote part of the US. So that's something that we're looking at more, where it used to be that you had to be located in one area. Now you're able to actually live pretty much anywhere. And so that it's, those are areas that I know we're exploring, and it depends on the agency. It certainly depends on the position that you're applying to, but that's one thing that I'm noticing more of, is that we're doing a lot more hiring for people in other areas. So just something to consider there, and offer different flexibilities as far as schedule and things like that. So that's something that USPTO is doing now.
Nina and Malik bring up some great points with this, and that's absolutely true. Over at the State Department, diversity is a main goal. Our office, the Office of Talent Acquisition, we oversee the hiring process for the whole Foreign Service, as well as do the recruitment for a lot of the civil service ideals as well. The Department of State brought in a Chief Diversity Officer, Abercrombie Gina Winstanley, who oversees diversity efforts now with the department. It's a main goal of the department. We expanded our Pickering and Wrangell fellowship programs by 50% over the last 2 years, which is one of the premier diversity programs to bring in individuals into the Foreign Service. But one of the main items right now is that we are hiring, and that is the biggest thing too. Our hiring efforts are increasing tremendously over the last couple of years. We're right now on pace to increase hiring in the Foreign Service by 30% over the last year. That's a tremendous amount, and we're working on the numbers for next year, and we're seeing an increase for that for next year, even too, over this year. The efforts are there right now where the support is to hire. We want to be able to bring in new individuals to be excited to join public service and to be able to join government. We're right now instituting a new paid internship program, one that is being rolled out. Interns before were all unpaid interns. We have 1,200 to 14 interns that come in every year. These are 10-week internship programs that is hard to do that in Washington, D.C. The first paid internship programs, and this is mandated now by Congress, is starting up in the fall, where our first interns are coming in this fall. They're all going to be paid, 200 interns. We have an application that's going to be out July 8th for our spring internship program, which I'll do a little advertisement for it. Please go to careers.state.gov. That's going to be rolled out July 8th for our spring internship program. These are for undergraduates. This is all to help out those, to make it more representative of Society for America, to be able to support and to get individuals interested into federal government. So these are all efforts that are being put forward to be able to bring new ideals, to be able to expand and to attract more individuals into public service.
Great. Thank you, Jason. And I appreciate the plug for internships. We're big proponents of federal government internships. Okay, yes.
Hello, my name is Aylar, and I really appreciate you guys talking to us. And my question is somewhat related to the previous one. So there is a federal restriction on employing aliens, and I was wondering, within your respective organizations, are there conversations or maybe initiatives around attracting foreign talent, or whether it's dreamers in constituencies that are not eligible for federal work?
I'm not sure if I got I'm sorry, could you come back? I'm not sure if I got the gist of the question about folks that aren't eligible for federal work. What do we think about it, or?
Sorry, yeah. So foreign nationals and dreamers, as of the moment, are not eligible for federal work.
Right.
And I was wondering whether there are conversations or initiatives around that, or whether it's not possible at all.
Well, I think a lot of those conversations aren't in the executive branch. I'm getting a little out of my water there. Those are things that need to be done through legislation. I think that is something, to one of the earlier questions, in the whiplash that happens between administration, and y'all are all savvy. That we've had very different approaches between the last few administrations on support for foreign nationals, regardless of how they have entered this country, how they should be treated in this country. I guess the one thing I would share just from our place, or from my place in the executive branch, is EPA, and this is part of our I guess just our sensitivity that we have developed from having environmental justice at EPA over 3 decades. This is actually the 30th year that we have had environmental justice as a commitment in EPA, is that we make very clear that our mission is to protect the health and environments of all people in the United States. And sometimes we still have to catch folks because they'll want to write about Americans, and we're like, no, we're not here just for Americans. Our job is to protect all the people in the United States. It doesn't matter what their status is. It doesn't matter if they're incarcerated or not. We are here to protect the health and environment of everyone in the boundaries of the United States. And that can get, just one of the things that my office does is we host a federal advisory committee. So this is a committee that we convene. It is actually convening this afternoon, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the NEJAC. It's a public body made up of citizens that give us advice on environmental justice issues. But of course, there's a lot of issues like farm workers. Environmental justice is a huge issue in farm worker communities across the United States. And so when we have these public meetings, when we go back to having them in person, which we're planning to do this fall, it would be much cheaper for us to host those public meetings, and they have to be public. They have to be available to the public. It'd be much cheaper for us to host it at the conference center in the basement of the EPA building here in Washington, D.C. But we're not going to do that because you need federal ID to enter that building. And we want to make sure that our meetings are open and available for anybody who wants to access them. So we're going to have to rent out hotel space so that anybody who wants to can just walk into that meeting, and you don't have to have ID to enter the meeting. But that's something that, that's the sort of thing that we can do on the executive branch side in terms of the decisions that we're able to make and how we effectuate government. But whether or not, people can apply to be a civil servant or the status of the dreamers, that's not the stuff that the executive branch gets to decide.
Hi, thank you for your time. My name is Miguel, and this is slightly like the example I'm going to use is the EPA because I'm interested in sustainability. But does like the EPA work with the DOE and the DOT or your other offices? Do they work with the other departments to further your goals? Thank you.
We actually, so that NEJAC meeting I was talking about that's happening today, the first day of it was yesterday, and we had a whole session about all the work we are doing with DOE and with DOT right now. Because a couple big things happened, right? We got the fiscal year 22 budget, which had a lot of money for EJ. But a few months before that, an even bigger budget came through that had a lot more money, the infrastructure package, right? So there are billions and there are hundreds of billions of dollars sloshing around at DOE and at DOT. We got tens of billions of it at EPA. So it's this incredible opportunity where we actually have money to go out and fix things that are impacting people's health and lives, whether it's transit or access to clean energy or cleaning up Superfund sites or making sure people have, lead-free pipes delivering water to them. But the systems and the structures that have been built over generations have been built in ways so that that infrastructure it has not been invested in communities of color and low-income communities in the same way that it has been in other communities, right? So now we have all these tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to fix things, but the systems and structures have never been effective at fixing those things in certain people's communities. So one of the things that we're super focused on right now is using the money we got at EPA through the EJ budget and some chunks of money that we're able to kind of pull together from DOE and DOT and a few other agencies. Agriculture's involved. We're actually inviting Interior Department into a conversation next Friday. We're trying as much as we can to kind of cobble something together between all these different agencies so that we can change the way that that money is going to actually flow out of the federal government, flow through states and local governments to actually touch down on the ground in the communities that need it the most, in the ways that those communities need it to get to them. It's a huge effort though. Like this is part of seeing how government works from inside a government. The way all this legislation and the systems and everything, none of it works. None of it is set up to work the way that most people want it to work. Like you really have to have folks that are committed inside of government, civil servants and political appointees coming together and saying, okay, this is kind of screwed up. But if we, let's talk to the lawyers over here and let's get some engineers over here and let's get some grant people working on this piece and let's try to make all these things come together in ways that might actually work for folks' communities. That's what we are spending a huge amount of time on right now in this administration. And, again, that's something that kind of ebbs and flows in different administrations, whether or not we have the opportunity to do so, whether or not we're even allowed, to kind of try to work across different administrations. That's something that isn't consistent. So when we get an opportunity like we do right now, we are all for trying to work with our other federal agencies to do that. But I mean, when you actually get into it and you know that there's dozens, if not hundreds of different laws, some of them 100 years old, some of them 5 weeks old, that govern these different things, and that law changes from each agency and the way their budgets work and the different things that the folks on Capitol Hill have put as restrictions on those budgets. It is really tough trying to actually make that jigsaw come together.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. We do have a couple minutes left. We want to ask one important question to the panelists, and maybe we'll have time for an additional student question. But this is specifically for Jason, Malik, Nina. You all work in talent acquisition. Can you talk about mistakes that you often see young people make when applying for federal government that this group should be wary of and try to avoid?
Yes, I want to start off with this one. Selling themselves short as far as the experience that you have. One thing that I see is students taking themselves out of the running for different positions because they feel like they don't have enough experience. And one thing I encourage anyone to do, in the federal hiring process, we don't necessarily stick to the one-page resume rule that you may have heard about some in the private sector. I encourage you to put in all of your experience in, whether it's volunteer, whether it's coursework, student organization, or otherwise. It's all valuable experience, and it can lead to different positions, or you being qualified for a different position. I would also say use your network. The value of relationships are incredibly important. So use your personal network, build relationships, take an opportunity to tap in and use people that you've been able to meet, not use, but network with people that you've been able to meet to find those right positions. But don't sell yourself short, either on your resume or even when applying for a position and you get to those questions that ask about your experience. You have experience, and so make sure that you are being able to sell your full experience.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with what Malik said, that primarily it is about all of your experience and all of the volunteer experience that you may have that you may not have considered to be applicable to the job that you're applying to. There are some specific soft skills that a lot of the applications ask about, like your, say, ability to communicate, which a lot of us use that when we have the opportunity to do volunteer work. And so you may not necessarily consider that relevant experience, but you may have had an opportunity that you didn't think about when you volunteered, that you provided presentations, or there could be some opportunities there where you had to provide some written skills in a volunteer opportunity that you didn't think about. So all of the experience could be potentially used as relevant experience to the job that you're applying for. Also, I will say some of the common mistakes that I have seen would be in the documentation itself. A lot of the applications that we do see, people may leave out documents that are required, and so that automatically has an impact on whether or not you get to the next part of the process. In many cases, for those of you all who are students, we do require a lot of times in the vacancy announcement to have your transcripts provided, and a transcript that shows that you have completed your degree. And so documentation isn't one of those areas where we see a lot of people, a lot of candidates that will knock themselves out of consideration because they haven't supplied all of the required documents to apply to the position. So that is definitely important. And then another thing I will say is that make sure that when you are applying to a position in the federal government, that you do thoroughly read the vacancy announcement, because there are several things that you may not necessarily see. Who may apply is one of those areas that we oftentimes that folks are applying to jobs that they may not necessarily have the ability to do because maybe they're not a current federal employee. They may be applying to the wrong type of announcement. If you haven't been a federal employee, you may be required to apply to an open competitive announcement, one that says open to all US citizens. So that's another area that you should consider when you're applying to, that we commonly see as mistakes when you're applying to a federal job.
Nina and Malik said it perfectly. Those are really the top items that individuals forget. And there's one other with this: network. Everybody that's around you is a contact. Everybody that's in that room right now with you is a contact. Don't forget that. Everybody that's right now on the screen is a contact. Work on the 30-second elevator pitch that you always hear about. Anybody that you meet, you never know who they are. People forget that. You never know who they are. You never know who's around you. Make sure that you make those contacts. Make sure that you reach out to the individuals. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to ask somebody. Trust me, people love talking about themselves. If you ask them about their career history, they will love to be able to tell you a story. You can see that with all of us. We all wanted to tell you our stories. They will want to do that. Make sure you reach out and do that for yourself. That's the way that you get to meet people, and that's the way that you get to build your network. And eventually then you will have that network too.
Great. Thank you so much. We have about 1 more minute, so if there's a really quick question. Okay, I see your hand. There you go over there. So if we could answer this, panelists, as quick as possible, but do want to get to this last question.
Hi, I'm sorry. I had a tailored question for Jason, if that's okay. So this past spring, I worked at the State Department actually for the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs and their China desk. And funny thing, so I interviewed for the Office of Korean Affairs, and I'm like Korean American, and also I've worked on Korean issues, so I was really excited about getting it. But then they reassigned me because the security clearance said I can't work on Korean issues, which is really funny because I've never been there and I just have family there, but that's it. And I feel like that's happened to some of my other friends too, have ties to a region and they got reassigned or something. And I was just wondering what is the State Department doing to rectify that? Because I feel like sometimes when you have a candidate that has ties to a region, I feel like they can contribute more meaningfully than someone else per se. So I'm just wondering what is State Department doing to fix that if possible?
I can't speak on policy with that. That's done through our diplomatic security office and, done through our security functions with this. I do understand where you're coming from with that and how that can be frustrating for individuals thinking about, hey, what do we have? So I really can't go into that because that is done through security functions with it. There are many different aspects though. I know that you said you worked on the China desk, East Asia Pacific, there's a lot of experiences that you'd be able to bring with that. And there's, and just don't forget that there's other experiences that are at large. So just because it's one section with that, the world is a large place. There's many different experiences that you can still be able to bring. And I'm glad to hear that you were able to work already at the State Department and had that already experience behind you. So you can be able to still be able to move that forward. So don't let that be discouraging just because there's one place. There's places that I can't work because of certain aspects, certain regions that, I worked before in the past or whatever it may be. That should not discourage you from being able to still move forward with that. It's, again, in our security functions, I can't really speak towards that at this point. But I do hope that you continue on and pursue that path.